Well, that was a great way to start, I think, the final session of our time together, because it represented the kind of energy and passion and interest in the issues that all of you have brought to the discussions the last couple of days. We've done a huge amount of sharing. I, for one, I think you would agree, we've done a huge amount of learning. And there's no question, I think, that the people represented in this group are already living the principles that we have identified as being so very, very important to children first. I think it's also fair to say that we're united in our belief that we really do have to create a new social norm where we all come together, communities everywhere, to believe that putting children first is the most important imperative of our generation, and that's always, everywhere, and every time. Oh, dear.
I didn't do that.
You didn't do that?
Ignore the man behind the curtain.
Who did that? I'm teasing. Just don't walk back there. Okay. All right. Anecdotally, a couple of people have mentioned the Canada-U.S. border. A couple of you have stopped me a little bit and asked whether, different systems produce different outcomes. I have no scientific research to offer, only to say that I think we've pursued different paths as countries. We are attached to universality in every aspect of social service. You are very much against it. Nonetheless, I think that if you look at outcomes, we've taken two different journeys, and we've ended up in kind of the same place. So the challenges that we face in societies on both sides of the border, I would say, are almost identical, and the directions that we've talked about being important for the future are remarkably similar. So it will come as no surprise, I think, that David and Ted are up here together to talk to us about what it is we think that we could do next. And as we look out on the fabric of what we're going to try to change. Cross-industry, a lot of people have talked about this. It's emerged as a very big issue, recognizing that our hospitals can be important community anchors for the work they do, but they need partners. And they need partners and coordination not only between themselves, but again, across industries, all to support our kids. So lots more work to do. And with that, I'm going to first ask Dave if you could reflect on what you think the way forward might look like and some of the things that you think we ought to be thinking about as we organize for next steps.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me tell you what I'm energized by, and that's all of you. It is astonishing to be in a collective like this of people who are living these principles every day, people who've given their time, their voice, and their philanthropy to support children's health and well-being. And we're here because we're connected to children's hospitals. Our children's hospitals would not be what they are today without your philanthropy and your leadership. So thank you for doing what you're doing. The way forward is a really interesting thing. So as I reflected Wednesday night, when we collected in 2012, we looked at the future and said, what will we need to create for our society to really raise the priority of children and their health? And what we concluded then was that we needed an organized leadership voice for children. That was the missing link. And quite frankly, there was a call at the end of that meeting that we should do it, and none of us were prepared to do it at that point. We didn't have a thought or a structure in our minds about that, and I think we're in a different place today. And what we are going to suggest is that we move on from here and create that voice. And I'm speaking now for the sponsors of this meeting, who collectively feel that we need to create a new organization that provides that leadership voice to change our culture around children, to really change our culture to raise the priority of children and their health and well-being. Now, this is a big, hairy, audacious goal, but these things can happen. And I'm going to give you two examples that should reflect to you the fact that we can create cultural change. I don't know if there's anybody in this room who was alive in 1930, but I will tell you that in 1930, in the US, 9.6% of children between the ages of 10 and 14 were employed full-time in the workforce. That was 1930. And I suspect if I asked most people in this room what year child labor was made illegal in the United States, they wouldn't say 1938. So now that's unthinkable. Well, we've changed that culture. I'll give you another one that several of us have lived through. I think that probably the majority of the people in this room were alive in 1960. In 1960, 36% of seniors were living in poverty, and 50% had no health insurance. And over the ensuing decades, we've created a new social contract, and today, less than 10% of seniors are living in poverty, and 100% of seniors in the United States have health care coverage. That didn't happen because of a person or a bill or a political party. It happened because our cultural norms changed. And we can do this for kids. But our organizations, the Lucile Packard Foundation, the SickKids Foundation, the Children's Hospital Association, can't do that. We have our own work to do. Our own hospitals have our own work to do. But we need to create something new, a new collective voice that starts with leaders to start to drive this cultural change. And what we're proposing is that we're inviting each of you to participate in that journey with us. And at your place is somewhere in my pocket is a card that looks like this. And we are going to ask you if you are interested in continuing on this journey with us, which will be more than just coming back to Aspen in 5 years. We are asking you to sign your name and give us a contact place so that we can get back to you. It is our hope that we will have an initial vision for what this might look like in the next few months. But we're going to need people to roll up their sleeves and participate. And we'll roll out that process over the next little while. So I'll turn this back to you.
Thanks very much. That's a great start. Ted, what would you like to add?
Well, one of the things I did in coming here was to take a look at what are the ingredients, the elements of really successful social movements. What are those things that we have to do to be able to change labor laws for kids? Or, you know, if you look at other things, the civil rights movement, the anti-smoking movement. In Canada, we had a whole movement around physical activity because we were embarrassed that we were less physically active than the average Swede. So we started something called Participaction. But when you look at the ingredients of social movement, first and foremost is that there has to be a burning platform. And I think, Mary, you put it very well in talking about the burning platform that exists even as we exit this room. The second thing is that there has to be a vision. Where do we want to go? And I think we have started to crystallize a vision for the future, a future where we do put children first. A third ingredient is really about a base of solid research and knowledge and information, because you can't build a movement without knowing the underpinnings of what you have to say and to prove later on. And I think Dal Meyer's presentation on our first evening started giving us that base of information to move this forward. But there is still probably more information that we have to gather, the proof points that will allow us to stake our claim about why we need to put children first. You need a pragmatic policy package. That is, you have to have solid ideas that are going to be, what I would say, succinct and implementable, because if we try to make this too big, it will never succeed. So trying to focus and find those things that will truly make a difference. You have to have a willingness to work with others, and I think we've heard this time and time again. While we can anchor this in our children's hospitals, we need to collaborate and work with others if we're truly going to look at the child and the family in a holistic way. You also need resources, and that's, again, where this group will come in helping us to generate the resources, at least to get us to stage 1 and then beyond to stage 2, to be able to put this effort together. And the final thing that you need, and I think this is a really helpful reminder for all of us, is that we have to be in this for the long haul. We cannot imagine that we're going to change something overnight. And so persistence and perseverance is going to have to be hallmarks of the social movement that we're trying to create here. So I'm excited because I do think we have, as we leave this room, the underpinnings of what will be a very successful movement as long as all of you start to engage with us. So I encourage you to fill out those comment cards as well.
There's a call to action. So you've heard it. I think that this is a vision of where we might take these important groups next. Who else we'll have to ask to join us along the way will become part of the dialogue. As Ted says, how we focus, how we prioritize, how we fund is all going to be a big part of the agenda of the new structure as well. But before we leave, we wanted to give you just a brief overview directionally of where we think we're headed, where we hope we're headed, and ask you, is there anything you would add? What are we missing? What should we avoid? What are pitfalls you've seen in other places where you've tried to bring about this type of social change? What were the key drivers where you were successful? So mics are roving, and if you have something to add, please raise your hand, grab the mic, and we'd love to hear from you.
We're missing kids in this forum.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent point. I chaired an event in Canada, which coincidentally is called Children First Canada. It's a small NGO run by a young woman in Calgary who came to Toronto to launch her effort. She's most famous for driving a change at the UN, where the UN adopted a resolution that said that every country member should allow its children to sue their parents for better lives and better support in situations where they were being oppressed. In any event, to your point, I was the opening speaker, but the two that followed me were both children. One was 8 years old and one was 12 years old, and they both spoke to an audience of adults in a very eloquent way about the challenges that they see from their perspective and why the things we have been doing to try to fix it, either in schools or in hospitals or in community centers, just aren't meeting the mark. And so I think that's an important voice. I have a mic here.
Yes, a couple of thoughts. First of all, I really support what David said about creating an organization to bring the voices together, because I think we have to speak with one voice, and we need a vision put together and a strategy. But the other dimension, someone mentioned it yesterday, was the creation of a PAC for kids. And one of my colleagues said to me that her and her husband, have dinners and so forth to events to advance certain political issues related to information systems and so forth, which is the industry her husband's in. Why can't we do the same thing for kids? And so I think creating a PAC is another one of the action steps that we need to take.
Great input, thank you. And I think that that has been echoed by a number of people, both who took the stage this morning, but also in table talk and conversations over dinner. I think that Mark yesterday gave us a kind of a rousing cry around what the possibilities might look like for political action. Other comments for Ted and Dave and the rest of the group that'll take this away? Here we go.
I'm just so excited about this, and I think it's awesome. I think we should do it. We make a big impact in our own communities right now, but individually. And if we get together and have our voices be heard together, I think we can make a huge impact. And I think it's time to do this now. So I'm all for it. I think it's awesome. So
all in. Thank you.
Yeah, just one comment. I mean, the conference has been terrific, and we heard some really inspiring stories today. But just to remember, most of our hospitals are in large urban areas, and it's already hard enough, but easier to focus on those kids. But a lot of poor kids in America, and a lot of the kids that we all care about and are thinking about, are in rural areas. So we can't forget, even though it's even harder, but we've got to include all those kids in those rural areas that have often been forgotten in these kinds of efforts.
I just make one comment. There are so many child advocacy organizations around both the US and Canada, who are doing incredible work. But they tend to limit their work around a population of kids, defined either geographically or socioeconomically. And I think one of the opportunities that we have here with this new enterprise is to talk about children and their families. There are significantly, there's a real amplification of challenges when socioeconomic problems, and one of those socioeconomic problems is where you live. And sometimes it's in the wrong neighborhood in a city, and sometimes it's that you're 400 miles from the nearest physician. So this really, one of the opportunities that we have is to be a voice for children, all children.
Over here.
So agree with a lot that's been said. I would just add, as Ted and Dave, you take this away and over the next couple months and put a draft together, I would think about including a couple of those other sector leaders on the front end. So it's not just a children's hospital-centric effort.
And just on that point, we had talked about educators as obvious ones, perhaps anti-poverty activists in that regard, people involved in early childhood programming that sometimes, at least in our country, sits way outside the education system. Are there others that you would think of that would be critical to that list?
Well, I think one's already been touched on, and that's families. And I think a related one is to make sure that it's diverse from the get-go in all respects.
Excellent input. Thank you.
So just from the process point of view, if you are brave enough to sign this card and send us your contact information, you will hear from us relatively soon. And one of the things that we're going to ask you for right off the bat are suggestions for other people outside of this circle who might be good to participate in this process. So that's something we're going to be asking for.
So just on this point that you're bringing up about industry leaders in other sectors, you know, food and environment play such an important role in what is affecting our kids' lives today. And the physicians, I don't want to insult anybody in the room, but they don't take a big enough stance with how nutrition, and there was a panel on this yesterday, and just environmental toxins are playing a role in all of this. And it is enormous, and it would be great to have leaders in that area also participate in that, because in order to move the needle on any of that, there has to be a force like this really having a massive impact.
Great input. Thank you. I'm going to go over here, and then I'll come to the back there.
So is that me?
Go ahead. Yes.
So I really want to stress the importance of bringing leadership from other sectors in as soon as possible. I've been a part of these conversations with other sectors earlier this year, and it's really amazing how some of the very same principles are, I mean, they're the same principles. So I think that there's a lot of movement, and especially across national philanthropy. We've been talking a lot about how to create a kids campaign. So I think it's really important that they feel like they're part of the creation of this. So that's one piece. The other piece is this really, really has to be bipartisan. And thinking about how to engage conservative and liberal and independent voices in this is just going to be essential, because we have to be able to elevate kids and families above the politics, and people have to be able to see themselves in this movement. So I think that's another piece that I would encourage you at the very beginning that we really need to pay attention to.
Excellent. Thank you.
You guys can hear me now? Okay. Every single community that's represented here has a workforce investment board, and that's Department of Labor dollars that are given into communities to serve the people that we're trying to serve. Those can be tied to the health system. For every community that we have here, there's also the National Fund for Workforce Development would be another excellent opportunity for us to learn and how they engage with the people that they're serving, and then how we can reflect that back into the children that we're trying to serve. So I think they would need to have a voice here. And if we engage that, we're going to engage additional dollars that we may not see or have allocated for children.
Thank you.
Over here, Kate.
Right here.
Yes, Steve Berman in Denver. You know, there are national children's advocacy organizations. Marian Wright Edelman's Defense Fund, Bruce Leslie, First Focus, Every Child Matters. So my question is there a way of leverage? I mean, they're obviously not cutting it, okay, which is why we need this. But is there a way in the strategic planning to leverage the resources that are out there to somehow strengthen them in as a part of this movement? Because we need a big tent. We need to bring the people that have been working in this area into this new movement in a way that is not competitive but is supportive.
So let me make one comment on that, Steve. You know, these organizations have been working in the trenches for years and doing incredible things. I mean, anybody who's ever met Marion Wright Edelman will worship the ground she walks on because she is a hero to many people in this room. But she and Bruce Leslie at First Focus and all these other organizations are doing their work in an environment where they're essentially swimming upstream. They're working in a culture that doesn't fully recognize the value that they're trying to bring to the world. And I think what we can do, working with them, is to ease that current against them, to change the culture so that their audience, for their individual message, whether it's Marion or Bruce at a national level, or Bill Shore at the hunger level, or Mark Shriver at the early childhood education level, have an easier environment to do their work in. And that's really what we're talking about here, is changing our culture so that these conversations are easier. And we absolutely will engage with all of those folks.
I've got one over here, and I need a mic up front. Go ahead, please.
Cindy Saturn, Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh Foundation. The Child's First, I'm wondering if we could use a model similar to the Giving Pledge. Perhaps we're not, it's within your own interpretation, but identifying those 5 principles, bringing it to a large group of philanthropists, industry leaders, and asking, the world to sign a pledge to put children first.
Great input. Thank you. Mike.
So I was struck yesterday by one of the speakers' comments about choosing goals that are big enough to matter but small enough to be achievable. And I like the concept of a social change movement, but if I think about social change movements around equality, you're really driven by specific milestones, achieving the vote, integrating schools. And I wonder the value of identifying some sort of a moonshot, some sort of an objective, cutting preventable lives lost in children and youth by 30% over 3 years, but something that would be an organizing principle that could engage different sectors with different interests, whether it's reducing preterm birth or whether it's injury prevention or other pieces, but to create a tent that's big enough but with a goal that's specific enough that you could actually chart your progress along the way and have an unassailable objective that would be hard for whatever party or whatever constituency to reject the importance of.
Yeah, that's a necessary thing for this to move forward. Whether it's one thing or 2 things, but there has to be something that we can measure against. What that is to be determined through this process.
I'm Kevin O'Keefe with the Riley Children's Foundation in Indianapolis. I think we have a very interesting and timely opportunity that at a time when so many people and government is so divided that we are representing an issue that nobody can really oppose. How can you be opposed to children receiving better health care or trying to do something to better the lives of children who are in poverty? The list goes on and on. Addressing infant mortality, so many great things we've heard. And that could be part of the platform moving forward. Thinking kind of on the big side, one thought is that I believe one of the reasons that all these great organizations are swimming upstream, including us when we go to Washington, D.C., goes back to the point that several of the speakers have made. We don't have a voting block. So why don't we create a voting block across the country in every state? And we always hear about the soccer moms come election time. Why don't we convert quote unquote soccer moms into moms for kids? the way to do that would be to take a political organizational approach, state by state, and to develop the voting block that we don't have, so that when we go to Washington, D.C. with our partners, we're going to get some attention that maybe we've never had before.
Great input. Thank you very much. Anybody else with something to add to the conversation? Well, as you heard from Dave and Ted, this is a dialogue that's just getting started. They and those of you who are brave enough to volunteer, and I hope that's many, will be called upon very soon to start to talk about what the destination looks like, what the road to that destination, as Mike points out, in terms of milestones and things we're going to try to achieve, what that all looks like, some of the organizing principles, as well as how do we make this both inclusive but also impactful, both from a societal outcome perspective, but also, as everyone has said, from a political perspective, because ultimately that's where the funding for so many of these important initiatives needs to come from. Sure, go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify on next steps. Ted and myself and Mark and our respective organizations are committed to facilitating this next phase of planning. So we are going to make sure that for those of you who are willing to participate, there is a next step, and it will happen relatively soon. So I just wanted you to be rested assured that there's going to be something that's going to happen, and that there's some people who are going to be responsible for making sure that happens. But we, Ted, Mark, our respective organizations, cannot do this work. We need you guys to be this voice. And that's what needs to be different coming out of this process.
Thanks very much. So it's my job really just to wrap us up, and in doing so, I want to just extend a number of thank yous. We thanked our sponsors at the beginning of this event. We want to thank them again. These gatherings don't come together without the support of many, and so much appreciation goes out to you who have helped to support getting this going. I'd like to send a special thank you to all of our speakers and facilitators. I don't know about you, but I thought that everybody did an absolutely fantastic job, really world class in every aspect. So much learning, so much inspiration. So thank you all very much. Of course, the Aspen Institute for not only hosting us here in their beautiful grounds, but adding so much to our dialogue and debate in terms of our way forward. Jane, we could not have done any of this without your masterful facilitation, which we all know started many months before we got here, and your team has done just a fabulous job in supporting us, both in getting here and enjoying our stay while we have been here. So thank you very much to you. I'd also like to thank our planning committee, and that's, of course, David, Mark, and Ted, who were also behind the scenes, really working very hard at formulating the agenda, the direction, and the spirit of this gathering. They have now agreed to take on a huge amount of additional work. I think that's just evidence of how passionate they are about the direction we're following in. So thanks very much to the three of you, not only for what you have done, but for what you are about to do. And lastly, I just like to send a big shout out thank you to all of you here in the room today. I started by saying that you really are living the Children First principles in all the work you do, no matter the sector that you come from. So thank you for the fabulous work you do in your businesses, in your institutions, in your philanthropic endeavors. And thanks for coming together to join forces and join voices as we take this most important initiative to the next level. I think there's nothing left to say except now let's get out there, get busy, and as I said at the beginning and many said along the way, let's get loud. Thanks so much for being with us.